Today, the Matt Walsh Show, Google finally admits that it censored conservatives at the behest of the Biden administration. This is an infinitely greater attack on free speech than Jimmy Kimmel's temporary paid vacation. Also, speaking of which, Kimmel made his triumphant return last night and only proved how irrelevant he really is. And pregnant liberal women are popping Tylenol in protest of the Trump administration, proving again that liberal women will just do the opposite of whatever Trump says, even if it means potentially giving their babies brain damage. All of that and more today on the Matt Walsh Show. Honestly, I never thought to switch up my bedding with the seasons. Sheets are sheets, or so I thought. Turns out I was wrong. One Boll and Branch bundle upgrade later, and my bedroom actually feels like a retreat instead of just where I crash after a long day of researching the stupidity in our culture. Their 100% organic cotton isn't some flimsy stuff that falls apart after a few washes. Now I'm actually looking forward to those crisp fall nights. I'm not usually the guy who gets excited about bedding, but Boll and Branch's bed bundles just makes sense. Instead of piecing together sheets, blankets, and whatever else one by one, like you're building IKEA furniture, you just click once and you get everything you need for a decent night's sleep. They got different bundles depending on whether you are the type who runs hot, cold, or just wants to feel like you're sleeping on a cloud. It's all made from 100% organic cotton, so you can feel good about yourself while you're passed out for 8 hours. Plus, they throw in a 30-night guarantee because they're confident that you won't want to return to your old, sad sheets after you experience these Boll and Branch. Honestly, it's probably the easiest room upgrade you'll ever make. We just added these sheets to the kids' rooms, too, and my wife keeps commenting on how they actually get softer with every wash. It's pretty much the opposite of every other bedding we've ever bought. After trying them, we cannot go back to those lame other sheets. Boll and Branch makes upgrading your bed easier than ever with curated bundles for a sanctuary of comfort. For a limited time, get 20% off bed bundles at bollandbranch.com/Walsh. That's Boll and Branch, BOLLAND branch.com/Walsh to save up to 20% off. Exclusions apply. More than 90% of Americans don't get enough fruit, vegetable, and fiber in their diet. We're all basically walking nutritional disasters. That's where Balance of Nature supplements come in. These aren't your typical synthetic vitamins with names you can't pronounce. We're talking about 47 whole ingredients, 16 fruits, 15 vegetables, plus spices and fibers. Real stuff like wild blueberries, kale, turmeric, and shiitake mushrooms. I've taken these fruit and veggie supplements for a while now. Honestly, it's nice knowing that I'm getting the variety without having to turn my kitchen into a produce section. It's especially handy to have while traveling as well. Plus, their fiber and spice is the only supplement on the market containing 12 spices with 4 whole fibers. Look, I'm not saying that this replaces eating actual vegetables, but when life gets crazy and your diet consists mainly of whatever doesn't require cooking, well, it's nice knowing you're still getting healthy ingredients with Balance of Nature. Go to balanceofnature.com, promo code Walsh for 35% off your first order as a preferred customer. Plus, get a free bottle of fiber and spice. That's balanceofnature.com, promo code Walsh. If you're a longtime listener of the show, you might remember that a couple of years ago, YouTube demonetized my channel. They were under pressure from various propaganda outlets affiliated with the Democrat Party, and they caved. The financial consequence was very significant. We're talking about 6 figures in losses every month. If we didn't have paying subscribers at the Daily Wire, if this were a much smaller channel with fewer resources, it would have been catastrophic. It was clear what YouTube wanted in return. They wanted me to pledge to use the so-called preferred pronouns of people who identify as transgender, men like Leah Thomas and Dylan Mulvaney. In other words, they wanted me to affirm a lie that contradicts my faith, my politics, and also just basic common sense and biology. And in general, they wanted me to refrain from offering any kind of meaningful critique of gender ideology. In YouTube's eyes, this was the only way to be advertiser-friendly. Now, of course, I refused to go along with this, so we ended up pulling the podcast from YouTube entirely for actually a whole year. And we just ate the financial losses, which were very, very significant. Eventually, several months later, YouTube relented. They agreed to allow the show to make money again without requiring me to affirm the trans lie. So we put the show back on the platform, and I continued to say what I had been saying all along. As far as I know, YouTube never offered any kind of explanation for their change of heart, nor did they offer an apology, certainly. It's possible that Google, which owns YouTube, realized that they had overstepped after we brought attention to their censorship on Twitter, which was now a relatively free and open platform. Once Elon Musk purchased Twitter, it became much easier for conservatives to highlight big tech's attempts to silence conservative discourse on other platforms. Previously, when YouTube banned pretty much every other conservative in the country, Twitter was their ally. And in many cases, they'd ban the same conservatives, you recall, at the same time so that they couldn't complain anywhere. You'll remember that YouTube banned both Alex Jones and Donald Trump around the same time that Twitter did. All the big tech companies at the same time. Twitter also suspended Dan Bongino around the same time that YouTube permanently removed him from the platform for saying that masks don't stop the spread of COVID, which happens to be true. And there are many other names that we could list, from Steve Bannon to Rand Paul to Sebastian Gorka, who suffered a similar fate. And that's not even getting into the many individual videos that were censored, including episodes from Tim Pool's show and interviews with RFK Jr., as well as thousands of smaller accounts that were impacted by all this. In every single case, YouTube targeted conservatives. This was, of course, a coordinated effort by big tech and the Biden administration to silence their political opposition. And it was very, very effective for a long time. They began with Alex Jones, who they labeled a fringe character, an exception to the rule. And then they proceeded to come for virtually every conservative with a large platform. In some way, shape, or form, they came for everybody. And while Google would occasionally walk back their censorship, as they did with my channel, they stopped short of issuing any kind of mea culpa for what they had done. They certainly did not implicate the Biden administration or blame Democrats for their censorship, as other big tech companies like Meta have already done. Well, yesterday that changed. After being investigated by Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee for several years, in particular by Jim Jordan, Alphabet, the parent company of Google and YouTube, admitted that they were repeatedly pressured by the Biden administration to remove conservatives from the platform. And now this is being hailed as like a major victory in some circles, but it's not. It's not remotely close to a victory, and nobody should really be celebrating it. But before we get into that, here's the document written by Google's lawyers sent to the House Judiciary Committee the other day. This is the big reveal. Quote, senior Biden administration officials, including White House officials, conducted repeated and sustained outreach to Alphabet and pressed the company regarding certain user-generated content related to the COVID-19 pandemic that did not violate its policies. A letter goes on to describe the Biden administration's effort as unacceptable and wrong. Well, that's nice of them to admit now. Why didn't they say so at the time? Why didn't they immediately disclose every single effort by the Biden administration to deplatform a conservative? Something they were doing systematically for years. And why did Google comply with these demands? Well, Google never answers any of these questions. But we all know the answer. This is footage originally obtained by Breitbart from an internal Google meeting shortly after Trump won in 2016. Now, this is not a group of random staffers, by the way. The founder of the company is leading this meeting. Watch.
I know this is probably not the most joyous TGIF we have had. Most people here are pretty upset and pretty sad because of the election.
I'm glad we're getting together at a moment like this.
And I think it's a very stressful time.
It's been an extraordinarily stressful time, I'm sure, for many of you. There is a lot of fear within Google.
I'm seeing Googlers who are full of fear.
There are people who are very afraid.
They're full of fear about the future. They're full of fear about what the uncertainty means for them and their families.
It's uncertain for many of us here, especially immigrants or minorities, women,
blacks, people who are afraid based on religion, the LGBTQ community.
I would just advise us all to be calm. There's a GCOM place that you can go to and just take a breath.
Healing is a process. It does take time.
As an immigrant and a refugee, I certainly find this election deeply offensive.
It did feel like a ton of bricks dropped on my chest.
Trump specifically, who I know many of us find very offensive.
These are the people who, for the next 9 years, would wage a coordinated and wide-ranging campaign of censorship against conservatives. Their goal was to prevent Donald Trump or anybody like him from ever winning another election. It was to prevent conservatives from being able to, take part in the so-called national discourse. One of their first targets was the Federalist, which YouTube threatened to demonetize on the theory that the website hosted a comment section with certain content that advertisers didn't approve of. Yes, they held the entire website responsible for a handful of random comments. Of course, this is a standard that could be used against any website that has a comment section. Every single one of them has a small number of deranged comments, or a large number. But Google chose to enforce this rule against conservative websites and conservative websites alone. It wasn't just the Federalist. Google also suppressed Breitbart in search results, making it nearly impossible to find. Breitbart's search visibility declined by roughly 99% in Google results. The Daily Caller also suffered massive declines. Now, Google is now attempting to minimize this scandal by telling Jim Jordan and the House Republicans that they're really sorry about everything that happened. Here's another part of the letter from Google. Quote, reflecting the company's commitment to free expression, YouTube will provide an opportunity for all creators to rejoin the platform if the company terminated their channel for repeated violations of COVID-19 and election integrity policies that are no longer in effect. Of course, this offer of amnesty comes about 5 years too late. Dan Bongino is working for the FBI right now. Presumably, he's not going to take YouTube up on their offer at this point. RFK is also working in the federal government. And of course, Joe Biden has been defeated. And not to mention all these people who are deplatformed, they've lost, many of them, millions of dollars. Are they going to be given restitution? Are we going to get reparations for all the millions of dollars that were lost? Now, we know the Google censorship campaign ultimately has failed. This is like the equivalent of an NFL team admitting that they cheated in the Super Bowl 6 months after they lost the game and then promising they wouldn't cheat anymore. Well, that's not good enough. Like, there need to be actual sanctions here. YouTube conspired with the federal government to suppress the First Amendment rights of American citizens. That's what happened. They're admitting it. Now, as a private actor, YouTube can do whatever it wants, but when it works with the federal government, it becomes a co-conspirator in a broader effort to destroy the civil liberties of Americans. And that's a crime, as we've been told again and again and again. They prosecuted Douglas Mackey for making a meme that supposedly made it harder for Americans to vote, which it didn't. That was a lie. I mean, the meme simply was making fun of Hillary Clinton and her voters. But all the same, they set the precedent. It's completely fair game for conservatives to begin criminally prosecuting left-wing organizations that actually did set out to undermine the constitutional rights of millions of Americans. We should not accept any letter as a substitute for justice. But there is one more part of the letter from Google's legal team that's worth talking about. We'll put that up on the screen. I'm not going to read this part, but as you can see, Google is basically saying that their policies have changed on everything from COVID to election fraud and glitches in voting machines. You see, it used to be that under no circumstances could you discuss any of these topics from a conservative perspective. But now you can say whatever you want about COVID or election fraud. In the span of just a few years, Google has done a complete 180 on the policies that it used to ban a huge number of influential conservatives from the platform. They were ruthless in applying these policies, even though, as they now admit, there was never any legitimate reason to apply them at all. Now, there's no way around this. This is the most widespread and devastating campaign against free speech in modern times. Actually, in the history of this country. It's like it's not even close. It was criminal. It was unconstitutional. And as it was going on, we didn't hear a word from any of the pundits on cable news who are now bloviating about the plight of Jimmy Kimmel. All the people who are calling Jimmy Kimmel a free speech martyr, who are saying that him being suspended for a couple of days is the greatest attack on free speech in American history, were completely silent as Google was systematically censoring conservatives at the behest of the government. In fact, they were cheering Google. I mean, they weren't just being silent about it, they were cheering it. And now they're supposedly horrified by the fact that the FCC commissioner on a podcast suggested that an aging, irrelevant late-night host might have broken the broadcast rules by lying about the murder of Charlie Kirk. That's their red line. Here's Jake Tapper, for example.
All right, Jimmy Kimmel, he's a friend of both of ours.
Yeah.
You know him, I know him. We know he's a good person. Obviously, this news is very exciting. But what was your original take on how this all went down starting last week?
I mean, I thought it was pretty much the most direct infringement by the government on free speech that I've seen in my lifetime.
Yeah.
You have Networks are allowed to cancel shows. It happens all the time. But this was the FCC chairman saying, local affiliates, it's time for you to say you're not going to air Kimmel anymore. And then Nexstar, with the largest owner of local affiliates, needs approval from Brendan Carr himself to let this merger go through. Yes, sir. How high do you want me to jump, sir? They do it, and it's just insane. And that would have been the second example, because we all saw what happened with our friend Stephen Colbert and Sherry Redstone and Paramount with a different merger and a different pressure point that the government has. And we'll see what happens when they come for Comcast, and they'll see what happens when they come for Warner Brothers Discovery, and maybe you and I will be drawing comic books.
I'm worried about you.
It was pretty much the most direct infringement by the government on free speech that I've seen in my lifetime. Really? Jake Tapper? I mean, forget about the government working with big tech to silence thousands of conservatives, including the president of the United States. Forget about, the pro-lifers who were jailed for praying, or the January 6th protesters who were hunted down and thrown in solitary for walking around the Capitol building. According to Jake Tapper, none of those crackdowns can possibly compare to Jimmy Kimmel's paid suspension for a couple of days. And then he goes on to make excuses for Stephen Colbert, Seth Meyers, and his own show when they're all inevitably canceled. It can't possibly have anything to do with the fact that no one watches them. It has to be the Trump administration's fault. Even if you disagree with what the FCC commissioner said, even if you think that his comments were an unforced error, this is a totally indefensible position for an allegedly serious news anchor to maintain. At most, Brendan Carr would be guilty of getting too loose with his language. If you think, if you're inclined to be critical, that's the most you could say. There's no evidence he actually exerted any pressure on ABC. He didn't launch any kind of investigation. Although, as we discussed last week, he would have been within his rights to launch an investigation, according to FCC policies. On the other hand, there's plenty of evidence that Kimmel's affiliates are just tired of his act. They don't think it's good for business when he lies about Charlie Kirk's murder, so they cut him loose for a couple of days to save face. And now he's back on the air, refusing to apologize, playing the victim, and so on. There is no universe in which the situation is comparable to the censorship of thousands of conservatives up to and including the president. And by the way, we see how significant that censorship is because as we talk about how there's been a sudden turnaround, we're now the right, we're winning on all these issues out of nowhere, it seems. And people are wondering how that happened. Well, this is how it happened. It's not a big mystery. It's because we were being prevented from participating in the conversation for many years. That there are these big megaphones that the left was allowed to use and we were not allowed to use. And now we have access to the megaphones also. Now we are also allowed to make our points. And as soon as we were able to do that, look how quickly things changed. And there's another way you can tell that none of these people really mean what they say. On the left, there's no outrage whatsoever about the fact that the new Apple show called The Savant is now being pulled in the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder. Leftists aren't complaining about censorship or self-censorship in this case. They're not clamoring to see a single episode. They're not warning about the chilling effect of the Trump administration's rhetoric in the wake of Charlie's assassination or anything like that. That's because the show very clearly was yet another propaganda effort by big tech to portray angry white conservatives as a serious domestic terror threat. It was a bog standard attempt to villainize men like Charlie Kirk. And now that Charlie's dead, there's no point in airing the show because it would backfire. Here's part of the trailer just to give you an idea. Watch.
It's going to be a coordinated mass attack.
Blood will be shed.
Locked and loaded. Been planted for months.
The hunt has begun.
What do you do in there all day? All night sometimes.
I track people who are planning attacks. My job is pretending to think like them to stop those people from doing really bad things.
FBI, on your knees!
That's why we call her the Savant.
Snipers, bombings, ambushes. We're on the verge of serious violence. I've been watching him for a year and a half. He's recruiting for something. I don't know what it is, but it's massive.
So the girl boss suburban female investigator is not hunting down trans terrorists. She's not going after Antifa. She's not targeting any of the people who actually commit acts of domestic terrorism in this country. Instead, she's going after white conservatives. And since Apple pulled the show, it's reasonable to conclude there was a Charlie Kirk-type figure in the plot. It's yet more agitprop to bolster the same exact narrative that got Charlie killed, which is the narrative that conservative white men are Nazis. And, you know it. The left knows it. That's why they pulled the show. Makes them look even worse than they already do. It would be a massive tactical blunder for Apple to go ahead with the show, especially right now. The reason leftists like Jake Tapper aren't upset with Apple right now is that fundamentally, they don't actually oppose censorship or self-censorship on any principled basis at all. They don't value free expression, whether it's on a college campus or in the entertainment industry or YouTube or anywhere else. They only support freedom of speech when it benefits them politically, when they can use it as a rallying cry to demonize their opponents. That's the only time they care about freedom of speech, which is to say they don't actually care about it at all. That goes for Google, it goes for Jimmy Kimmel, it goes for Jake Tapper, it goes for all of them. And that's why, unless prosecutions and lawsuits are coming, no conservative should talk about this new policy change from Google and celebrate it like it's some big victory. It's meaningless. It's an effort to buy time until they can censor more conservatives if and when the left regains control of the federal government. Any Republican who says otherwise or who champions this new policy as some kind of victory is hopelessly naive at best. Put simply, the people who cried when Trump became president cannot be trusted to hold any power over the vital internet and communications infrastructure in this country. One letter does not change that. Reinstating a few accounts does not change that. The only deterrent these people understand is actual consequences, particularly in the form of prosecutions and lawsuits. The other day, Donald Trump posted a public note to Pam Bondi urging her to accomplish something while in office. Well, this would be a good place to start. Take these executives to court. Deal a fatal blow to the censorship regime. Put something in place, put consequences in place so that they can't just ramp it up again in a couple of years. You have their admission in writing. Now, before any more conservative voices disappear from the public stage in the next few years, it's time to use the power that you have. Now let's get to our 5 headlines. I was shocked to learn that the liver is actually the second largest organ in your body, handles over 500 different functions, yet we barely even think about it. Here's the thing, though. Over 30% of Americans have a sluggish liver, and most of us don't even know it until it's too late. That's why I'm excited to tell you about Dose for Your Liver. This isn't another supplement. It's a science-backed, drinkable formula that was specifically created to cleanse your liver of unwanted elements while supporting digestion and keeping your body's natural filter running smoothly. What really impressed me were the clinical results. In a double-blind, placebo-controlled study, Dose for Your Liver actually lowered liver enzyme levels by 50% in over 86% of participants. And get this, one shot is equivalent to 17 shots of turmeric juice. When you stick with Dose over time, you can experience some incredible benefits: more energy, better digestion, reduced bloating, healthier liver enzyme levels, plus less brain fog, and even better sleep. You get all of that. Plus, it's gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free. Most importantly for me, personally, it's also vegan. Save 25% on your first month of subscription by going to dosedaily.co/Walsh or entering Walsh at checkout. That's dosedaily.co/Walsh for 25% off your first month subscription. Well, just as we started recording, news was breaking about this shooting by a sniper at an ICE facility in Dallas. At least one person is dead. The shooter is also dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. And the preliminary information from the FBI tells us that the rounds had anti-ICE messages written on them. So this was, of course, another case of left-wing terrorism. And, you know, the thing is, I actually deleted my initial post about this shooting on X, because as soon as I heard about it, I posted that left-wing violence is a national emergency and the federal government has to ruthlessly crack down and crush the terrorist threat. And that's what I posted. I deleted it because I was just assuming, you know, it was like 30 seconds after I read about it, I was just assuming that it was left-wing violence. At the time, I had no information. I had no direct evidence that that was the case. I just assumed it. And so then on second thought, I thought, well, that was irresponsible, you know, so I deleted it. But then, of course, it turns out that my immediate assumption was correct, which you know, we all knew would be correct. I mean, it's, you know, I knew it, even when I'm deleting it, I'm like, well, there's a 99.9% chance that this is true, but I just want to be cautious. Well, we're at the point now where you don't even need to bother being cautious. I mean, honestly, like the left has a near monopoly on political violence. The pattern now is so clear and so well established that you might as well assume that any act of political violence is left-wing until evidence proves otherwise. It's a very safe assumption. It's like if there's a school shooting, it's safe to refer to the shooter as a he, you know, as him, even before you know anything, even before you know a single thing. It's, you know, if you're just kind of reflexively saying he in reference to the shooter, really safe assumption. On very rare occasion will that assumption be proven wrong. But it's an assumption backed up by statistical data that leans extremely heavily to one side. And the same thing here. Same thing here. So I'll have more to say about this case tomorrow. We'll talk about it in the opening monologue. But for now, just to kind of reiterate the initial point that I made, left-wing violence is a national emergency. It really is. We can't even go a week anymore without multiple left-wing terror attacks. So the entire force of the federal government must be brought down, as I was saying, ruthlessly to subdue and crush this terrorist threat. I mean, the Biden administration, or the Trump administration, rather, is saying that Antifa is a domestic terrorist organization. I totally agree. They clearly are. But are we treating them that way or not? Because if they're a domestic terrorist organization, which they are, then every left-wing militant who is affiliated with Antifa or any of its splinter groups should be rounded up and arrested immediately. Like today, they should be out with vans and buses rounding up anyone affiliated with Antifa or any of its associated groups and arresting them. Because that's exactly what we would do with an American that was affiliated with ISIS or Al-Qaeda. Just being affiliated with them in the first place is a crime. We don't have to wait for you to actually commit a terrorist attack. We don't have to wait for you to kill somebody. If you're an American and you have any kind of affiliation with ISIS, you're getting arrested, and we're probably not going to see you again. Because that should be the consequence of designating something a terrorist group. If we really mean that, which hopefully we do. But so this should not just be like a symbolic thing. This shouldn't be just we're symbolically considering Antifa domestic terrorists. No, they are a terrorist group. That is what they are. And they have been that since their inception. Countless acts of politically motivated violence. That's all they do. That is all they do. If Antifa rallies or gets together or to do anything, it is always violent. And now we have what is it, 4 left-wing terror attacks in the past 2 weeks. You had, of course, the killing of Charlie Kirk. You had the shooting at a country club by somebody shouting "Free Palestine." You had the shooting at an ABC affiliated station by somebody who was upset about the Jimmy Kimmel thing, a leftist. And now you have this. And I'm just talking about 2 weeks. I mean, we could go back. I mean, this is a trend that has been going on for far longer than 2 weeks, obviously. And attacks on ICE facilities in particular, and ICE agents, that has been its own epidemic. But I just want you to imagine something for a moment, okay? Just imagine that we have a Democrat administration, and imagine that a right-wing radical shot and killed one of the most famous and influential liberals in the country on live television. Okay? And then imagine that in the same week, another right-wing radical shot up a left-wing, a liberal, meeting of some kind of organization, shouting some right-wing slogan, shouting MAGA. Some right-wing shot up anything, but shouting MAGA. And in the same week, a different right-wing radical shot up a news station claiming that they had a liberal bias and they were outraged by it. And then a week later, a different right-wing radical shoots up a Planned Parenthood. A militant conservative with a sniper rifle on a rooftop shooting at a Planned Parenthood. Imagine that all those things happen by conservatives in the span of 2 weeks under a Democrat administration. Is there any doubt what the response would be? I mean, they'd be breaking down my door right. They'd be breaking down my door right now. I mean, I'd be getting hauled to the FBI would be hauling me away. Every influential conservative in the country would be under investigation for being involved in inciting this violence. They'd be arresting everybody. Okay, everybody. There would be calls to just shut down Fox News completely. Just shut it down, board up the doors, close it down permanently. There would be mass arrests. Okay, like you wouldn't even, as a pro-lifer, you would not be able to. The March for Life in January would be they'd show up with buses and arrest everybody. That's how they'd respond to just this violence in the last 2 weeks. We could go back and we could talk about. We're not even talking about the trans terrorists who shot up the church in Minnesota. I mean, we could go back. We're not talking about the other attacks on ICE agents, the other attacks on law enforcement. We're not even talking about the other example of Antifa militants just yesterday. We're outside of a federal building. I think it was in Washington State, laying siege to a federal building. So, like, I'm just taking these 4. Just pretend it's just these 4, and flip those around. And imagine all that happening in the span of 2 weeks under a Democrat administration. They would just be arresting everybody. It would be a full-scale war on the right. And it would be merciless. And we all know that. And I'm not even calling for the exact sort of response that the left would have in this situation, because they have no respect for the rule of law and they're tyrants. And so they would respond by just crushing and suppressing everyone's speech. They would just make it illegal to be a conservative and give your opinion publicly. That's what they would do. That's what they would do. Just those 4 attacks alone would be enough, and this would be a national emergency. This is like martial law, and anything goes. That's what they would do. I'm not even saying we should do that, because I actually respect the rule of law. I mean, we're conservatives. The rule of law is important. I don't want to suspend it. But this is a national emergency, and it should be treated as such. Donald Trump should declare it a national emergency, should declare a national emergency, due to left-wing violence, because that's what it is. And while respecting the law and respecting the Constitution, they should be doing everything in their power. And there's a lot they could do in their power, legitimately, to crack down on these radicals and to treat them as the domestic terrorists that they are. But we'll talk more about that tomorrow. Okay, Jimmy Kimmel made his, as we mentioned, made his long-awaited return to the air last night. Long-awaited for 72 hours, 3 entire days, 72 hours. Jimmy Kimmel returned from exile. It was a harrowing 72 hours, right? When they should make a movie about it, an Oscar bait movie about his it'd be like what's that movie about the guy that had his arm stuck in a rock, 127 hours, James Franco. So and I think he won an Oscar for that. So there should be a movie called 72 Hours, very similar, about Jimmy Kimmel's harrowing ordeal, except that instead of being stuck, having his arm stuck in a rock, he's just sitting on his couch in his Beverly Hills mansion, watching people compliment him on TV for 3 days. But I can't imagine what Jimmy's been through. Who could endure this suffering? Pray that you do not have to undergo the test as Jimmy Kimmel has. So he came back. Honestly, I didn't watch the monologue. I almost did. I actually went to YouTube to find it because I figured I would talk about it on the show. And so I was looking, and then I stopped myself and I said, what the hell am I doing? What have I become? What have I become? I'm looking up a Jimmy Kimmel monologue. I'm going to watch the whole thing. I've never watched an entire Jimmy Kimmel monologue in my life. So I almost did, and then I realized that, I actually don't care about this at all. I don't care in the slightest. So I didn't watch the whole thing. I did see only this brief clip of his, I guess this is supposed to pass for his apology. And here's what that sounded like.
I don't think what I have to say is going to make much of a difference. If you like me, you like me. If you don't, you don't. I have no illusions about changing anyone's mind. But I do want to make something clear because it's important to me as a human, and that is you understand that it was never my intention to make light of the murder of a young man. I don't think there's anything funny about it. I posted a message on Instagram on the day he was killed, sending love to his family and asking for compassion, and I meant it, and I still do. Nor was it my intention to blame any specific group for the actions of what it was obviously a deeply disturbed individual. That was really the opposite of the point I was trying to make, but I understand that to some that felt either ill-timed or unclear, or maybe both. And for those who think I did point a finger, I get why you're upset. If the situation was reversed, there's a good chance I'd have felt the same way. I have many friends and family members on the other side who I love and remain close to, even though we don't agree on politics at all. I don't think the murderer who shot Charlie Kirk represents anyone. This was a sick person who believed violence was a solution, and it isn't. Ever.
So we're supposed to feel sorry for Jimmy now that he's getting all choked up. And notice, he didn't get choked up after Charlie died. He didn't get emotional about that. That'd be understandable. If he was getting emotional about Charlie's murder, I wouldn't judge him at all for that. In fact, I'd have some level of respect for him. It's like showing real empathy for someone on the other side of the political aisle. But that's not what's happening here. He's crying not for Charlie, but for himself. He's getting emotional out of self-pity. He pities himself because so many people misinterpreted him, he claims. But we didn't misinterpret him. I mean, he absolutely implied that Charlie's killer was a MAGA Republican. And now that theory is totally unsustainable, he's pivoting to saying that, well, the ideology doesn't matter. This is just a sick person. He's a sick person. And, it doesn't matter. He doesn't represent anybody. So there's no accountability here. There's no apology. There's no admission of wrongdoing. And again, remember, Kimmel implied that the shooter was a conservative long after it had been irrefutably proven that he's a leftist militant. I mean, it would be one thing if he just assumed it before we had any facts, which also would have been bad. and would not have been, unlike my assumption about the ICE shooter, assuming that this was a conservative who shot Charlie Kirk doesn't make it doesn't make any logical sense. But that's not what happened. This was after we knew that this was a leftist. He went out and made this statement, and it was just a flat out lie. And he still refuses to be accountable for it. In fact, he's the opposite of accountable. He has been rewarded. And his show last night, unsurprisingly, was the most widely watched show that he's done in a long time. CNN was very happy about that. Watch.
CNN's Harry Enton is here to run the numbers for us. Like, at this point, I don't think we have the ratings for TV numbers.
No.
But you've been looking online and...
Huge, absolutely huge. What are we talking about here? Well, let's take a look at YouTube views, Jimmy Kimmel Live video views. The 6-month median, the median video only gets 240,000. Look how many views Tuesday night's monologue already has. 6.7 million. That's over 25 times as large as the median Jimmy Kimmel video normally gets. And I was looking, it is by far the largest video in at least 6 months. But take a look here. Record high Google searches last night for what time is Jimmy Kimmel on? You wouldn't have to check what time Jimmy Kimmel was on if you were a regular viewer. The reason that people were checking what time Jimmy Kimmel was on, because he was potentially pulling in a lot of viewers who normally didn't watch. And get this, it was up over 10,000%. My goodness gracious.
Okay, first of all, again, I must restate, we don't need the guy with the big touchscreen randomly underlining things. Why do we need him to underline and circle the words on the screen? It says 10,000% in huge bold letters. We can see it on the screen. You don't need to underline it. It's the only word on this. That's it. That's all. It's right there. You don't need to stand next to it and underline it. We can read it. CNN's audience for the most part can't read, but even for them, underlining it isn't helpful. So I just don't understand the point of the touch screen. They love using these touch screens now on cable news. They find any excuse they can to use them. And they've all got the touch screen guy that stands by the screen and circles stuff. You see this here? Well, look at it'd be one thing if this was some impressive piece of technology and they were just finding any excuse to use it. It'd be one thing if this was a hologram or something. If this was a Star Wars esque hologram technology and they were just finding any reason to use it, then I would get that. I would accept that. But it's a touch screen. Since I was a kid, we've had touch screens. Every time I see this, it really reminds me of when I was in high school. I had a teacher who there was a dry erase board, a big dry, instead of a chalkboard, a dry erase board, and he liked to use it, but he didn't know how to use it. He's the only teacher I ever saw that had this problem where he didn't know when he was talking about something, he was never sure what to write on the board to help illustrate the point and to give us a visual learning experience. So he would just at random points just write a word or phrase or underline something. And then so by the end of the lesson, if you look at what's on the board, it was just like this schizophrenic looking thing of random where you couldn't draw a connection. And I remember one time he was talking about perspiration and he started to write perspiration on the board, but then you could tell he realized he didn't know how to spell it. So he just stopped at PERS, P-E-R-S. And then continued talking. At another point, he came back around and he said perspiration again. So he circled it. And so at the end of the lesson, the only thing on the board was PERS circled. That was it. Just not a helpful visual aid is all I'm saying. And I always think of that when I see this CNN's touchscreen guy. More to the point, they're trying to impress us with his big numbers. But all they've proven is that, what we already knew, which is that Kimmel is irrelevant. They tell us that he's averaging 240,000 views per video on YouTube. Now, that's respectable if you're like a podcaster. That's probably about what I'm averaging over the past month. I don't know. I haven't looked, but it's probably something like that over the last month. But I'm just one guy sitting in a room, talking to the camera. I'm not employed by a major network. I'm not promoted by the mainstream media. I don't have celebrities coming on my show. I don't have an army of writers helping generate content. I don't get paid $15 million a year like Kimmel does. And also, this is not even a primarily video format. I mean, it's an audio podcast with a video element. So most of the audience listens on Apple or Spotify. We also have an audience on the DW platform. So it just goes to show why late night TV is dying. It's like it's not sustainable. Online, you're getting the kind of audience that a political podcast can generate with a tiny fraction of the production budget and none of the marketing, none of the promotion, none of that. And you're getting, the same kind of audience, which is really, and I looked this up. Kimmel has a staff of 200 people working on just his show. I can tell you another thing. I don't have 200 people. I don't have 200 people working. I can't even imagine that. Working with a staff of 200 people that are dedicated just to your show. 200 people. $15 million a year salary. Endless promotion from the mainstream media. You work for ABC. Okay, you're owned by Disney. And like a multi-billion dollar conglomerate. And what's your online audience? 240,000 for all of that. So all that combined effort and all that money, and that's what you get. You get, again, what someone like, a couple of producers sit in front of a camera, talk about the news. It's the same kind of audience. So it's just not, this is why late night is dying. There's just this, and this really shows. And then this was his most, what did they say? It was 7 million. Which, yeah, it's a lot. Like 7 million, that's a lot. But they want us to be impressed by that only a few days after Charlie's memorial. What was the audience for that? It was 100 million. 100 million. Not even counting the hundreds of thousands of people who physically showed up. And then 100 million more watching online on various platforms. And then, they look at 7 million and they want us to be totally blown away by it. One other quick thing to mention, Politico, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has shuttered a nearly century-old committee created to expand the role of women in the military, part of a broader effort to redefine the image of the armed forces. The closure of the Defense Advisory Committee on Women in the Services is Hegseth's latest effort to rid the Pentagon of efforts that don't fit into his warrior ethos vision for the department and service academies. He's also shut down a program that boosts the number of women in peace building and conflict prevention efforts, calling it woke and divisive. So it won't surprise you to hear that I'm very much in favor of this. This should be uncontroversial. I mean, if we lived in a time where common sense and rationality reigned supreme, it would be uncontroversial. We don't quite, I think common sense is very much making a comeback, but I don't think we quite live in that world yet. So maybe it is still a little controversial. Even if you think that, this is the point, that even if you think that women should be allowed in the military, even if you think they should be permitted, you should still agree that obviously we shouldn't be out there making any special effort to actively recruit them or to expand their role. I mean, it's one thing to allow them to have a role, and I say this as someone, I don't think they should have any role, certainly not in combat. But that's one argument, right? I think it's a bad argument, but it's one thing to say, well, we should let them have a role. And that's always kind of like when we argue about this topic, that's always the position we're arguing against. If you don't think that women should have combat roles, you're arguing against the position that says they should be allowed. But that's not really right. That's the left kind of as they often do, for the sake of the argument, they're backing down to a slightly more defensible position, but that's not really their position. Because what their position really is not just that women should be allowed, but that we should do everything we can to actively recruit them specifically and to get as many of them into the military as possible and to expand their role in every single area. That's what they actually think. It's just that in a debate, they won't defend that position because it is impossible to defend, just totally impossible. Because why would we do that? In what way does that help anything? Has any military ever been made stronger by expanding the role that women play in it? Has that ever happened in history? I'm not even asking if there's ever been a military that had women in it and was also strong and formidable. I'm asking whether any military has ever been improved, has ever been made stronger, has ever been made more formidable by adding women. Like, imagine two militaries, right? You've got one, and it's the same. You got one where it's 100% men in every role, all men, right? And then you've got, and then now take that same military, and whereas before it was 100% men, now imagine that it's 40% women. It's only 6% men, 40% women. Could you make the argument that in the latter case, it is now stronger? It's now better at being a military because there are fewer men and more women. I think that you clearly cannot make that argument. There's no, I mean, you couldn't give any example, you couldn't give any measurable, any data to make that argument. So clearly this was the right move by Pete Hegeseth. Let's get to the daily cancellation. Fall is a great time of year with the trees changing and bold colors all around. Autumn leaves look nice until they end up clogging your gutters, causing headaches and potential damage. With Leaf Filter, America's top gutter protection company, you can enjoy the season without worrying about cleaning them out ever again. Right now, you can schedule a free inspection and estimate, plus save up to 30% off on your entire purchase at leaffilter.com/Walsh. Look, you could keep messing around with those cheap DIY fixes from the hardware store, but let's be honest, how many times do you really want to climb a ladder and scoop out gunk with your bare hands? Not a fun time. Leaf Filter is the permanent solution, built with patented technology that only lets water through. No gaps, no holes, no excuses. Every installation comes with a lifetime no-clog guarantee, so once it's on, you're done. That's it. Here's the kicker. A Leaf Filter Pro doesn't just slap it on and leave. They'll actually clean, realign, and seal your gutters so everything works the way it's supposed to. Over 1 million homeowners already trust it, probably because they're tired of wasting Saturdays cleaning out gutters. Who wants to do that? Don't spend the season worrying about gutters. Schedule your free inspection and get up to 30% off your entire purchase at leaffilter.com/Walsh. That's leaffilter.com/Walsh. That's a free inspection, free estimate, and 30% off at leaffilter.com/Walsh. See representative for warranty details. Our society works because of the freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment. Americans should be able to speak openly about truth, family, and traditional values without retribution. And that's a principle Pure Talk proudly supports. They sponsor my show, which allows me to stand strong behind the microphone every day and share the truth with you. And you could support the brands that defend freedom and pro-American values. I encourage you then to switch your wireless service to Pure Talk. You're going to get great 5G coverage on an extremely reliable and secure network. It's important to support companies that support you and your values, and Pure Talk does just that. And that's one of the many reasons why I love Pure Talk. For just $35 a month, you'll get a plan with a ton of data, and you'll also get a free 1-year membership to Daily Wire Plus. That's how much Pure Talk believes in what we do at the Daily Wire. They also believe in creating American jobs and supporting small businesses. So if you're a small business owner, you can save even more while enjoying white glove service. Go to puretalk.com/Walsh, switch to Pure Talk with a qualifying plan of $35 and get a free 1-year membership to Daily Wire Plus. That's puretalk.com/Walsh for a wireless company that's not afraid to share your values. Now let's get to our daily cancellation. Here's a little piece of trivia to file away under the good timing category. The brand name Tylenol was first introduced back in 1955 by a company called McNeil Laboratories. They marketed it as a way to reduce fevers in children. Just 4 years later, the growing pharmaceutical giant Johnson & Johnson bought McNeil Laboratories along with the rights to Tylenol. They quickly started selling the drug over the counter beginning in 1959. That arrangement continued for decades, right up until 2 years ago. After nearly 70 years of owning the Tylenol brand, Johnson & Johnson decided to hand off Tylenol to a spin-off company called Kenvue. They also jettisoned a couple other well-known brands, including Band-Aid and Listerine, placed them under the control of Kenvue. Now, whatever you think of Tylenol, you have to admit that this transition came at precisely the right time. In just the last month, Kenvue's stock is down by around 20%. Meanwhile, Johnson & Johnson is down only 1%. In other words, it looks like Johnson & Johnson successfully insulated themselves from the brand damage, or at least a lot of the brand damage, that has resulted from increased government scrutiny on Tylenol. 2 days ago, as you may have seen, that government scrutiny boiled over. The President of the United States, looking directly at the cameras, told pregnant women not to take Tylenol. He said it's too dangerous in the vast majority of cases. Watch.
Tylenol during pregnancy can be associated with a very increased risk of autism. So taking Tylenol is not good. All right, I'll say it. It's not good. For this reason, they are strongly recommending that women limit Tylenol use during pregnancy unless medically necessary. That's, for instance, in cases of extremely high fever, that you feel you can't tough it out, you can't do it. I guess there's that.
For Big Pharma and the media outlets that take millions of dollars in advertising money from Big Pharma, this statement was a 5-alarm fire. Tylenol generates something like $1 billion in annual sales. Every week, 25% of Americans take a drug that contains the active ingredient of Tylenol. Any brand damage could quickly amount to massive financial losses. So right away, every network did their best to neutralize this story. Here was CBS, for example.
We begin tonight with the President of the United States promoting a link between the risk of autism and the active ingredient in an over-the-counter pain and fever medicine. The president, flanked by his health secretary, Robert F. Kennedy, told pregnant women to only use Tylenol if they can't, quote, tough it out. The announcement of a link is drawing criticism from scientists and doctors who say there's not enough evidence to back the claim. CBS News medical contributor Dr. Celine Gounder joins me now. Dr. Gounder, let's just start with the basic question. Is there a proven link between prenatal use of acetaminophen and autism?
No, John. The best evidence we have does not show that Tylenol causes autism. They cherry-picked a couple studies that they thought backed their claims. They ignored the lion's share of studies that argue against Tylenol causing autism. The best recent study argues against a causal link. This is a study from Sweden looking at siblings, 2.5 million births. And when they compared siblings, so they're controlling for family genetics and other risk factors, they found no association with autism and ADHD. And I also want to note major medical organizations continue to advise that Tylenol can be used during pregnancy. These are the people who care for and about their patients. They have no political points to gain here.
So the major medical associations disagree with the administration, and of course we can trust them. It's not as if the major medical associations were wrong about COVID, about transgenderism, about SSRIs, ADHD, pretty much every other significant issue in the past 20 years related to medicine. They say Tylenol is safe, and so that's good enough for CBS News. Now here's the part where I should say, I'll happily admit, that I take really no position on whether Tylenol indeed causes autism or contributes to it. I don't know enough about the subject to make an informed judgment. I haven't done really any research into it. So I don't know. I do find it very compelling that even Tylenol agrees that you shouldn't take Tylenol while pregnant. You're not going to hear anybody on CBS News mention this, but Tylenol's Twitter account tweeted this back in 2017 in response to somebody else. We actually don't recommend using any of our products while pregnant. Thank you for taking the time to voice your concerns today. And there are actually a bunch of tweets like this where they say that. So that's very interesting. And now maybe we know why they issued that warning. Just a few weeks ago, a dean at Harvard School of Public Health, Andrea Baccarelli, conducted a study funded by the NIH, which found a, quote, association between Tylenol exposure during pregnancy and increased incidence of neurodevelopment disorders, including autism. He published a study in the journal BMC Environmental Health that's been widely circulated online, and he worked with researchers at the School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. So this wasn't a one-off study from a random crackpot. And again, it's not an old study. It's from a few weeks ago. But to be fair, as the CBS doctor pointed out, there are studies showing a different conclusion. And I've seen various criticisms of the Harvard study focusing on the methodology. New York Times also just published a hit piece on the dean at Harvard saying he took $150,000 to testify as an expert witness in a lawsuit against the company that makes Tylenol. Of course, all these studies and experts are being funded by somebody. Every single one of them has a conflict of interest if you look hard enough. I mean, any study of this nature it's being done for a reason. Somebody's funding it, and which is why I don't give a lot of weight to studies in general for this reason. And if you've been paying attention for a while, you know that the media for roughly a decade has been warning us that Tylenol can cause autism and other behavioral disorders. Watch.
It's supposed to be the safe option. Acetaminophen, most widely known as Tylenol, is routinely prescribed by doctors for pregnant women in pain. But a new large study out of Denmark calls this long-standing practice into question. In the study, women using the common pain reliever during pregnancy were more likely to have children who went on to have ADHD.
The research is raising concerns tonight that acetaminophen could be linked to autism and ADHD.
Acetaminophen is the most commonly used medication for pain and fever during pregnancy. Well, now we're learning that women who take it when pregnant may be exposing their baby to an increased risk of behavioral problems and other disorders, such as Tourette's syndrome.
A new study from Johns Hopkins found taking acetaminophen late in pregnancy may be associated with a higher risk of having a child with autism or ADHD.
A new study from Johns Hopkins finds taking acetaminophen late in pregnancy is associated with a higher risk of having a child with autism or ADHD.
New research out of Spain is raising concerns about prenatal exposure to acetaminophen. A popular brand in the United States is, of course, Tylenol. A study from Spain included data from over 70,000 children. It shows those whose mothers took acetaminophen during pregnancy were about 20% more likely to develop ADHD or autism symptoms.
If you go back long enough, you'll find that medical experts have contradicted themselves on pretty much every single topic, just like this. They'll tell you a few drinks of wine can add years to your life, and then they'll tell you on the next breath that actually can cause cancer. And there are a million examples like this. It's all very confusing, which may be the point. There's never been a clear answer on what causes autism or how, but that hasn't stopped the experts from offering theories, only to walk them back a few years later. In the 1950s, the refrigerator mother theory was popular. The idea was that if women don't demonstrate maternal warmth towards their children, then their children are likely to become autistic. Today, the explanation has fallen out of favor. Autism is widely considered to be a genetic phenomenon. In any event, for one reason or another, autism cases among young children have risen, there's no doubt about it, by roughly 400% in the past 2 decades. A statistic that strongly suggests that we changed something that should not have been changed. In case it's not abundantly obvious, I'm in no position to pass judgment on any of these theories, but I am in a very good position, to judge the hordes of pregnant liberal women on TikTok who are currently slamming down Tylenol on camera for the sole purpose of telling Donald Trump who's boss. And this is a phenomenon that has predictably taken hold very, very quickly. Within hours of Trump's press conference, the pill bottles came out. Watch.
28 weeks pregnant. You know what I'm going to take? Some Tylenol, acetaminophen. It's going to work like a charm, and my baby won't have autism.
It would be interesting to know how much Tylenol was consumed when these women were in the womb themselves. That'd be a valuable data point for Harvard and Mount Sinai. Really, there's only 2 options here. Either these women are desperately hoping to give birth to the next Greta Thunberg, or they're risking the health of their children for some likes on TikTok. I mean, neither option is good, but that's what we're left with. Again, I'm no doctor, but none of these women appear to actually need Tylenol at the moment. They don't seem to be in any kind of distress. Seems they're just taking it to take it. They're taking it out of spite. I mean, as a general rule, I would say, and you don't need a medical degree to say this, that taking any kind of pharmaceutical out of spite is always wrong. That's never a good reason to ingest any kind of chemical into your body, is out of spite. These women are discarding the possibility that Tylenol causes brain disorders, a possibility that no one can actually refute conclusively, and there is good evidence that that could be the case. And they're doing it in exchange for praise on the internet. And they're doing it in large numbers. If you happen to notice that Tylenol is running low at your local drugstore, this is probably why. Because all the women in your area, all the liberal women, are wanting to make TikTok videos. This is an image that's currently going viral on Instagram. It reads, "Autism doesn't need to be cured." Yes, leftists would rather embrace a neurological disorder than give the Trump administration any kind of credence. That's where we are. At the same time, as dark as this situation is, I have to admit, it's amusing to see that, once again, these people will immediately do the opposite of whatever Trump says. I mean, we all know, this is not any great revelation. I'm not saying anything you don't know, but there's not a single issue under any circumstance where these women can admit that actually Trump may have a point. At an intellectual level, at an instinctual level, rather, they have to contradict whatever Trump says. They have to make a very public showing of disagreeing with Trump so that all their friends know that they're not on board. And this is a power that Trump has that frankly, I wish he would use more. That he can get these liberal women he can get them to do anything. Get them to do anything just by urging them to do the opposite of that thing. So I can tell you one thing, I wish Trump would come out and claim that, it's a bad idea to shower every day. Overnight, you would fix the hygiene problem on the left. If only he would say that. Now, of course, the downside is you have a bunch of liberal women taking videos of themselves in the shower. So we'd have to see that. But the plus side is that, things would smell a lot better around here. But fixing the abject stupidity might be a tougher challenge. Here's one more video in this new genre of women downing Tylenol to own Trump. Watch.
About to take Tylenol for my headache while pregnant because I don't take my medical advice from a man who doesn't have a degree in science, healthcare, or medicine, and who had a parasitic brain infection and was addicted to heroin for 14 years. Yeah, I'll trust my doctors who have their degree.
This is another common sentiment on the left. They're completely unaware that many studies exist, including from the public health school at Harvard, that agree with the Trump administration. The dean at Harvard who wrote the autism study has an MD as well as a master's and a PhD. But his opinion doesn't count in left-wing circles. As always, credentialism is just a way to advance the narrative. If you have credentials and agree with them, then they'll cite your credentials. If you have credentials and you don't agree with them, then they'll drown themselves in Tylenol and pretend you don't exist. As entertaining as these people are, there is one more irony to discuss here. That this Tylenol obsession is yet another example of the left rushing to the defense of big pharma without any self-awareness. And there's no doubt that every single woman in these TikTok videos would say that billionaires are a cancer, that capitalism has to be dismantled, and all the rest of it. And yet, for all their affinity for socialism, when it comes to big pharma, they're playing the white knight. And they do this all the time. White knighting for big pharma. Frankly, there's something very funny and ironic about watching a bunch of communists valiantly defend the profit interests of the multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical industry, to the point that they're willing to, chug Tylenol on camera. The good news is that, once again, these people have exposed not only their hypocrisy, but also their ignorance and stupidity. The bad news is that in about 12 years, an army of Greta Thunbergs might descend upon us. And that is why all of the pregnant leftist women who are overdosing on Tylenol to spite Donald Trump are today canceled. That'll do it for the show today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Talk to you tomorrow. Have a great day. Godspeed.
Don't just get the news. Understand what the news means on The Michael Knowles Show. I will take you beneath the surface of daily political events to see their historical, philosophical, even religious roots. Catch it Monday through Friday at 9:30 a.m. Eastern on the Daily Wire.